Dr. Shashi Tharoor, an author, United Nations peacekeeper, refugee worker, human rights activist, a member of India's Parliament, and former Minister of State for External Affairs. Dr. Shashi Tharoor's experiences straddle several worlds. Mr. Tharoor was India's official candidate to succeed the UN General Secretary Kofi Annan. Dr. Tharoor has authored 12 award-winning books and regularly writes for the likes of the New York Times, the Washington Post, the International Herald Tribune, Time magazine, and more. Born in London, Dr. Tharoor was educated in India and the United States, where he did his PhD. Dr. Tharoor was named a Global Leader of Tomorrow by the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. He was named to the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman in 2004, and many more that came along his way. Dr. Tharoor is an internationally known speaker on many India-centric themes and topics. Presenting to you, ladies and gentlemen, a dashing charmer with a velvety smooth narrative and a disarming smile, Dr. Shashi Tharoor.
As Dr. Tharoor's flight departs immediately after his session, may we without further ado request him to grace us with his talk on the theme Global Turbulence, India's Path. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Shashi Tharoor.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone here. I must say I was a bit struck by that amazing video that the kids have put together this morning. Congratulations to those of you who've done that. I listened attentively to the commentary as well. I must say those are very kind adjectives. It's the kind of praise that my late father, whose birthday is today, would certainly have appreciated, but only my mother would have believed. Anyway, thank you. It's clear when you see these introductions that the people have looked you up on the internet. This is what happens these days when you come to address a new audience. And the fact is that this can be a pretty dangerous pastime. You sometimes find yourself being introduced by things that you haven't actually done, but which they've seen on the internet. Not always the most reliable source, you know. However, in this case, there was no mistake. I'm glad they kept it mercifully brief as well. I remember a friend of mine in New York used to not only look up speakers by what he could find on the internet about them, but he would look up their ancestors, their deeds and misdeeds of parents and grandparents and uncles and aunts, and use them in his introduction. And in one case, he was going to introduce a speaker who had been electrocuted at Sing Sing prison, you know, in the electric chair for kidnapping and armed robbery or something equally horrible. But having taken the trouble to look this up, he felt he had to use it. So he said, you know, our distinguished speaker had an uncle who occupied the chair of applied electricity in one of the nation's leading institutions. Which is just my way of saying that these introductions should be taken with a pinch of salt, but thank you very much nonetheless for the kind words. The fact that we are gathered here today in this very impressive indoor stadium, or should I say Indore stadium, I'm not sure, is in some ways a tribute to the persistent impact of globalization. Global leadership in turbulent times is what our organizers want me to situate India in, and in some ways it's fascinating to think that way, because in fact here we are in the heartland of India, and we're thinking about the rest of the globe. In some ways, even our most commonplace headlines in the most routine matters reek of globalization. Not just the front page headlines on world affairs, but I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, there was the headlines all over the newspapers about the 10th anniversary of the tragic demise of Princess Diana. Do you remember that? Well, you may ask, what's that got to do with globalization? Think of it this way. An English princess with a Welsh title leaves a French hotel with her Egyptian companion, who has supplanted a Pakistani. She's driven in a German car with a Dutch engine by a Belgian chauffeur full of Scottish whiskey. They are chased by Italian paparazzi on Japanese motorcycles into a Swiss-built tunnel where they crash. A rescue is briefly attempted by an American doctor using Brazilian medicines, and the story is now being told to you in Indore by an Indian member of parliament from Thiruvananthapuram. There is globalization. Anyway, I think it's time to probably get a bit serious on a Saturday morning, but as you look towards the broader themes of this two-day conclave, and we think in terms of what are the major changes taking place in the world today, before we get to focus on India's leadership role, if that is the right term, and I'll come to that. We should probably talk a little bit about emerging markets, because that's the biggest feature of the recent changes in the way in which the world has been functioning. And the fact is that the very term emerging markets actually started off as a marketing phrase when a gentleman in America was trying to interest investors in what he called rashly a third world equity fund. And of course, he found no takers. The third world suggested stagnation, poverty, depression. And then he decided to come up with the term emerging markets equity fund. And that, of course, was oversubscribed, because emerging markets suggested positive forward movement and dynamism and change. But in some ways, he had stumbled across the right sort of thing, because in many ways, there have been a huge amount of changes in these emerging markets. And while it's been very difficult to find an agreed definition, and those of you who are studying management will probably be able to Google everything from the IMF to the Morgan Stanley definition and emerging markets index to the Economist magazine. Everybody has a different take. There's even a political analyst who's described an emerging market as a country where politics matters at least as much as economics to market outcomes, which is another way of looking at it. But definitions should not detain us too long. In fact, in my UN days, which have been mentioned, I remember an argument, perhaps an apocryphal one, between an American diplomat and a French diplomat, in which the American diplomat says, you know how we can solve this problem? We can do this and this and this, and we can solve it. And the French diplomat says, yes, 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 that will work in practice, but will it work in theory? I bet that sounds like some of your management professors, right? The fact is that it doesn't matter that we don't have an agreed theoretical definition. What's striking is that all these definitions will still give you a list of some 28 to 33 countries around the world, which vary hugely in size, in growth rates, in political environment, and in per capita GDP, alphabetically from Argentina to Vietnam, but embracing such different places as China and Mexico, India and Hungary. Now, if you had to issue a checklist of criteria for what's happening around the world with these emerging markets, I would say very quickly that the emerging markets will fulfill these criteria. Economies that were not in the past deemed to be amongst the developed or first world countries, but were rather seen as low or middle income countries. Economies that are still experiencing sufficient growth now to be considered as transitioning to eventual developed country status, though they're not there yet. Economies previously characterized by high levels of poverty and underdevelopment, which are being overcome to a greater or lesser extent through market-oriented reforms. And then finally, and this is where it gets a little more complicated, economies undergoing political change of various kinds. And there are various examples given: the transition from communism in the countries of Eastern Europe, Vietnam, the transition from other forms of autocracy, like the Philippines, South Africa with its apartheid system, South Korea, general's rule, or well-established democracies in times of turbulence, India and Brazil. But in all of this, China is considered the great exception, because it's a country where political transformation seems minimal, while economic growth is impressive. But it may be instructive, though, for the Chinese to realize that just a year ago, if you were drawing up this category, this list of countries in this category, you would have included Egypt and Tunisia as two countries where there was no political change but a lot of economic growth. So history and politics have a habit of surprising us, and the Chinese should not be totally complacent. Now, I should add, since the majority of you here are students, and I should try and give you some up-to-date gyan, that the fact is that this term is probably beginning to near the end of its useful shelf life. The whole term of emerging markets is slowly becoming a little passé, not just because President Obama came and stood in our parliament and said, you're not an emerging market, you're already emerged, which is flattering but probably not entirely true. The fact still is that the phenomenon of emergence just is too loose, too broad a category to be useful as either an analytical device or as an investment device. And so people want to focus on a more select list, and the most famous one was when Goldman Sachs in 2003 came up with the term BRIC to cover Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and then forecast the success and prosperity of these countries 8 years ago. In fact, it must be the only international gathering actually invented by an investment firm on Wall Street, because the leaders of the 4 BRIC countries then started taking it seriously, meeting together, and finally they became such an influential group that the South Africans wanted to join the party, and BRIC has now become BRICS. And if you go into the theory, as we were joking about earlier, you will find someone to add Mexico and make it BRIMC, and someone to make it unpronounceable by adding Turkey with a T. But let's forget all of that for now and just look at the 4 BRIC countries, the original BRIC countries, in the Goldman Sachs list. And you're looking at 4 countries which are likely collectively to overtake the original G7. The original G7 were the 7 largest economies in the world. And they're likely to overtake them by 2040. So that is an extraordinary thing. 4 countries that would not even have got an invitation to the waiting room, as it were, outside the outside the original G7 meeting, will now overtake them all collectively by 2040. Now that's for the speculative future, of course, but right now these countries already account for about 30% of global growth. They attract some 20% of the world's total foreign and direct investment. Thank you so much. They represent some 20% of all global trade. They possess more than a quarter, they possess more than 35%, in fact, of the world's foreign exchange reserves, and they account for perhaps a quarter of the world's demand for oil. So as of 2010, there were 62 emerging market companies in the Fortune 500 listing. 5 years ago, there were just 25. So you can see that there's been some very, very important changes. In fact, Goldman went on to say that China may overtake the US as the world's largest economy by the late 2020s. I still think that we'll have to look at the numbers more carefully in that time, but the late 2020s is still almost 2 decades away, and it's not impossible. Goldman even says that India will overtake the US economy by 2050. There I'm a little more skeptical for all sorts of good reasons we can talk about, but the fact is that in either case, we're really talking only in gross terms, because no one expects the Indian per capita income to match that, or that the average Indian's lifestyle will not eclipse the average Americans by 2050, since there will be 4 times as many Indians as Americans in the world at that time. But the fact is, China's per capita income has been growing up in galloping terms, and it's not impossible that they could one day get there. Now, all of this, like all forecasting, makes a lot of assumptions. And one of the key assumptions made by Goldman in the first decade of the 21st century was that the Chinese and Indian growth rates of 8 to 10% a year would just continue. And as we know from our own experience, that is not entirely justified. The Chinese have been able to manage to stay above 8. We've just revised our estimate to 6.9% for the current fiscal year, and many are revising it further downwards. But the truth is that both China and India have multiplied their per capita income levels many, many times over since 1950. And they've done so far faster in recent years than Britain or the US did after their industrial revolution. So the idea, therefore, that China and India could triple their current economies in the next 15 years is not implausible to most economists, not even to the World Bank, judging by their annual assessment of global economic prospects. And one more striking thing which is worth mentioning, particularly to the students in this room, is that India has already emerged, according to the IMF as the world's third largest economy. Now, I know that's going to cause some confusion amongst the serious students here who know that at the moment Japan is the world's third largest economy, that they have a $4.3 trillion GDP, whereas India's is only $1.3 trillion. So how can we overtake Japan, you may reasonably ask? Well, this measure of the IMF is on purchasing power parity, PPP. What you can get for $1 in India is very different from what you can get for that same dollar in Japan. So in PPP terms, our 1.3 actually is 4.06. Still behind Japan, but this fiscal year, Japan is not going to grow. After the tsunami, the earthquake, the Fukushima disaster, they're actually going to not only have zero, they might even have negative growth in this fiscal year. Whereas even in our downward revised projections, we will grow at 6.9%, and therefore in PPP terms, we will overtake Japan to become the world's third largest economy. Now that's a huge deal, and it comes at a time when the proposals for the 5th five-year plan, I beg your pardon, the 12th five-year plan are coming out right now, and it projects a growth rate of 9% between 2012 and 2017. That may seem unduly optimistic these days, but we did hit 8.2% during a global recession in the 11th five-year plan, so anything is possible. I don't want to waste too much more time on numbers, even though I was told the students here want some serious stuff they can take back to their examinations. But I still want to make the larger point that, and with some confidence, that India, whatever is happening, will continue to prosper and pull more millions out of poverty than we have ever done. That our companies will compete effectively with Western companies for business, that they will purchase foreign companies and assets, they'll expand their trade and overseas investments, they will invent and develop new technologies, and they will displace more economic weight around the world. As a result, India will inevitably demand more authority in the international system, and though I'm not going to talk about that much in my talk, I'm very happy to answer questions on India's global role during our Q&A to follow. China may well go beyond that and be the country that strips the United States of its current designation as the world's sole superpower. That adjective sole is not going to be there in perpetuity. But let me stress that this would still only be a partial reversion to a historical state of affairs. According to the late British economic historian Angus Maddison, back in 1820, India and China together accounted for half of the world's total economic output. India had about 23% of global GDP, China nearly 27%. And if you go back earlier, our percentage was even higher. Neither of us is close to those numbers today, and even the most optimistic projections of our rise do not see our two countries accounting for 50% of global GDP in the 21st century. It's not going to happen. So, though there has been a genuine shift in global economic power, it would not bring these two countries back to the position that they occupied just 2 centuries ago. Yet, we are increasingly hearing about India providing sort of global leadership in these turbulent times, to borrow the phrase used by the organizers of this 20th anniversary conclave of IMA. I have to say that I'm a little skeptical of that term, and I'm not going to use it too much in the course of this talk. I'll tell you why. Even as an Indian politician and a former minister and so on, I've been a bit worried about the amount of hype we've been hearing about India becoming a world leader. Even the word superpower has been loosely bandied about. I made myself a bit unpopular by saying we can't be a superpower when we're still super poor. That was not well received, so I don't want to inflict it on you. But the truth is that world leadership is a peculiarly archaic notion. It's sort of redolent of Kipling ballads and James Bondian adventures. After all, what constitutes a world leader? If it's population, then we're on course to top the charts. We're going to overtake China as the world's most populous country by 2026, according to UN figures. Is it military strength? Well, we have the world's 4th largest army. Is it nuclear capacity? Well, there, we all know we have it, but we are 7th or 8th in that list of nuclear countries. If it's the economy, well, as I said, in dollar terms, it's It's somewhat smaller, but in PPP terms, it's now the world's third largest, and we're growing. But as I said in a talk that some of you have seen earlier, I'm not sure that world leadership is what we should be aspiring to in those conventional terms. I think that what we can, however, celebrate is the leadership provided across the world by our culture, by our attractive ways of organizing ourselves, our own assets in the world in terms of soft power. And because some of you have already seen that speech, I'm not going to go back to that subject in my talk, but if others are interested in pursuing it in the Q&A, I will come back to that too. But returning to the global turbulence and the leadership issue, it is fair to say, though, that throughout the recession and the global troubles we've seen in recent years, India managed to remain the second fastest growing major economy in the world after China. And this was when most countries in the world suffered negative growth rates in at least one quarter in the last 2 years, in the last 3 years, I beg your pardon. What happened? What was the reason for this? And can we speak of leadership in that context? Well, I would mention 4 major factors. First, our banks and financial institutions were not tempted to buy the toxic mortgage-supported securities and engage in the fancy derivatives and credit default swaps that ruined several Western financial institutions. Second, our merchandise exports did register declines during the recession, let's face it, even 30% declines. But our services exports continued, and they did well. Third, remittances from our overseas Indian community remained robust. If you just look at the recession years in the world, $46.4 billion we received in 2008-09, the first year of the recession, $55.75 billion in 2009-10, and we're currently expecting $58 billion this year. And the bulk of this is coming from blue-collar, working-class Indians in countries in the Gulf and so on, who are sending their money home to support their families. And then the fourth and final factor is an interesting one because it does have some resonance, and that is something like 80% of our GDP does not come from the external sector, but from Indians producing goods and services for other Indians. And that is sustainable, whatever is happening in terms of the global recession. Now, this kind of global economic stature for India is actually quite a remarkable change, because as many of you know, for 4 decades, India suffered what I used to call the economics of nationalism. That is, our tendency to equate political independence with economic self-sufficiency, which had isolated India from the world economy. Now here you're all management students, you probably want to work in the private sector, the CEOs here are all from the private sector, associate capitalism with freedom. But don't forget that our nationalist leaders, the ones who fought for our freedom, they associated capitalism with slavery. Why? Because the British East India Company had come to trade and stayed on to rule. And so they were suspicious, our nationalist leaders, of every foreigner with a briefcase and a capitalist idea, because they saw him as the thin end of a new imperial wedge. And instead of integrating India into the globalized capitalist system, as very few post-colonial countries did, India's leaders were convinced that the political independence they had fought so long and so hard for could only be guaranteed through economic independence. That's why they made self-reliance the mantra, the slogan. The protectionist barriers went up, and India, as we know, spent 4.5 decades with bureaucrats rather than businessmen on the commanding heights of the economy, spending a good part of this time with the best intentions in the world in subsidizing unproductivity, in regulating stagnation, and in trying to distribute poverty. Which only goes to show that one of the lessons you learn from history is that history can sometimes teach you the wrong lessons. Anyway, I don't want to belabor this point, but we have moved on from there. And having suffered what was derisively called the Hindu rate of growth of 1.5 to 3%, chugging along, while the rest of Asia raced ahead, and in not developing the kinds of resources we need for our infrastructure, our health, our education, and so on. And I should say in front of a management conclave that it's sadly impossible to quantify the economic losses inflicted in our country over 4 decades of entrepreneurs frittering away their energies in queuing for licenses rather than manufacturing products, in paying bribes instead of hiring workers, in wooing politicians instead of understanding consumers, and in getting things done through bureaucrats rather than doing things for themselves. The disastrous inefficiencies of our system were masked, of course, by subsidies from our national exchequer. And as a result, sadly, we were able to shield all of this from economic reality as millions of Indians languished in poverty. It took a financial crisis in 1991 to prompt our country to change course. And our then finance minister, now our Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, remarked 20 years ago, the year of your first management conclave, in his speech on the floor of Parliament, quoting the great writer Victor Hugo, the French writer, he said, "No power on earth can stop an idea whose time has come." The idea whose time had come was that of the unshackling of the Indian economy and the freeing of our system that you've all seen. And economic reforms that followed have been accepted and maintained by every Indian government of every political complexion thereafter. Even if these economic reforms have been pursued with the hesitancy of people looking over of politicians looking over their electoral shoulders. Politicians have to get re-elected, so they're always very cautious on how far they can go with economic reforms. You know, years ago, the students here, when I was about your age or even younger, I was wandering the corridors of the Ministry of External Affairs in 1977, trying to do my research on India's foreign policy. And there I met a veteran diplomat and an already retired former ambassador who told me memorably, he said, "You know, my boy, Indian diplomacy is like the lovemaking of an elephant. It is conducted at a very high level, accompanied by much bellowing, and the results are not known for 2 years." Now, that is no longer true. No longer true of Indian diplomacy, I can assure you, because Indian diplomacy has become much more sprightly since then. But it may be true of Indian economic reforms, which, as we've seen with the recent debacle on FDI, are sometimes announced from on high amidst great fanfare, and then take a couple of years to be actually realized because of all the resistance, the political backlash, the bureaucratic and other vested interests and obstacles that have to be overcome. But it's clear that change has happened and will continue to happen. In fact, in the last 20 years, we have pulled more people out of poverty than in the previous 45. We don't often acknowledge this. Our left keeps saying the rich have become richer and the poor have become poorer. It's actually not true. The rich have become richer, no question about it. I sometimes joke that if Mukesh Ambani walked in here, suddenly everybody's per capita income would shoot up. But if he left, none of us would feel any richer in our wallets. So yes, the rich have become richer. It hasn't necessarily benefited all of us, but the poor have become less poor. About 10 million people a year have come out from below the poverty line. And the truth is that's only 1% of our population. It's perhaps nothing, but 10 million people is no insignificant number. And there is a visible prosperity in the country, which I know you can see around you in Indore and which you can see everywhere. Now, suppose you wanted to call another city, let's say from Calcutta you wanted to call Delhi, you would book something called a trunk call. And then you would sit by the phone all day waiting for it to ring. Because if it rang and you didn't pick up, you'd go right back to the bottom of the queue and wait another few hours for the call. Unless you were prepared to pay 8 times the going rate for something called a lightning call. But in those days, even lightning used to strike rather slowly in India. So a lightning call took about half an hour to come through, rather than the minimum 4 to 6 hours of a trunk call. Now I can see the people of my vintage sitting in the front who are smiling and nodding in recognition of the stories. This is what it was like. In fact, as late as 1984, when a member of parliament got up to complain about the woeful services being offered by this national telephone monopoly, our then communications minister, not Sachin Pilot or his ancestors, but one of his predecessors, stood up and said in a very lordly manner that communications are a luxury in a developing country, not a right, that the government had no obligation to provide better service, and that if the honourable member was not satisfied with his telephone, could he please return it, since there was an 8-year-long waiting list for this inadequate instrument. That's 1984. Now you fast forward to 2007 when I wrote my book. And when I wrote this chapter on the cell phone, I was able to record in it with great pride that in April 2007, the month I was finishing my manuscript, that India had just set a new world record by selling 7 million mobile phones. 7 million was more phones, more telephone connections than any country in the world, the US and China included, had ever managed in the entire history of telecommunications. So I wrote that very happily, sent it off to the publishers, it got printed and bound and emerged in all good bookshops, even in Indore, in December of 2007, and by then that figure was already out of date. Because in the interim, while the book was being printed, the world record had been broken 3 times over, and we had sold 8.3 million cell phones in December of 2007. Now the book is still in print. There's therefore been no opportunity to revise it. It's still sitting there in your bookshops. But in 2008 we crossed 9 million. In 2009 beginning we crossed 10 million. By the end of 2009 we crossed 15 million. And in the last 3 months of 2010, India sold 20 million cell phones each month. That is 10 times the number of any telephone connections than the entire country had when I went off to study in America. Now that's the kind of transformation that we're talking about. If you want to call it leadership, fine. The numbers have dropped. The last few months have been between 8 and 9 million, not 20. You can't sustain 20, but we are now already the second largest telephone market in the world. We've long since overtaken the United States. China is still ahead of us, but we are growing faster. And with so many SIM cards in circulation in our country, no communications minister can say that communications is a luxury and not a right. But let me say, more important is why it's not a luxury. Who's carrying these mobile phones? It's not just the affluent, the people who used to get the telephone connections, those landline days. It's ordinary folks. Your bus driver, your taxi driver will have a mobile phone in his pocket. You come to Delhi, I don't know about Indore because my first visit here, but you must have the Istriwala phenomenon, right? In the suburbs of Delhi, you'll find an Istriwala. He's got a cart that looks like it was designed in the 16th century. On it rests a coal-fired steam iron that was designed in the 17th century. But in his pocket, he'll have a 21st century mobile phone. Because as you know, most calling plans are free for incoming calls, and it costs him nothing to get apartments in the neighborhood and homes telling him that come and pick up a sari or a shirt or whatever to iron. Look, I was in Kerala, in my constituency in Thiruvananthapuram, and the farm, the country farm of a friend of mine, about 20 kilometers away from the capital city. And it was a hot day, a lot of coconut trees around. So I said, hey, would you like to drink some fresh coconut water? Which, as you know, is the most refreshing and nutritious thing you can drink on a hot day in our country. So I said, sure. And he whipped out his mobile phone, dialed a number, and a voice said, I'm up here. And right on top of the nearest coconut tree, with his lungi around his knees, fishermen now are taking mobile phones out to sea. They catch their fish, and as they come back near the coast, they dial all the market towns along the coast to see where they'll get the best price for the fish they've caught. Farmers, I mean, I'm sure this is happening in Madhya Pradesh. A farmer in the old days, just 10 years ago, 12 years ago, what did they do? They'd do the harvest, then they'd go, or they'd send an able-bodied male relative, could be a 10-year-old boy, on an 8, 10, 12-kilometer hike to the nearest market town in the hot sun, walking all the way, probably barefoot. The fellow would find out if the market was open, whether he could sell the crop he'd harvested, what price that crop would fetch, what the competition was. Then he would trudge back, again 8, 10, 12 kilometers in the hot sun, barefoot, to the farm. They would then load the cart and they would go off to the market. Half a day's back-breaking labor, which is now solved and eliminated with just 1 2-minute phone call. See, that is the transformation of India. It's the empowerment of the ordinary Indian. That is the way in which we can provide meaningful change and positive direction in turbulent times. And I mention all of this because, frankly, there's no point giving you all a very theoretical speech about all of this. And I'm very conscious, by the way, I often say to foreign audiences that the old joke about India is anything I can tell you about India, the opposite is also true. But when I say the opposite is also true, I mean you should learn to understand and accept the India of paradoxes. An India where our IT experts are striding confidently forward into the 21st century, but where our population, many parts of our population, lives in each of the 20 other centuries. That is also part of what India is. In fact, the image is best captured by a photo that went around the internet, so the young people here may have seen it, during the time of the last Kumbh Mela. Some of you may have seen this picture. It's a picture of a classic sort of, Hindu sadhu, a naked holy man, matted hair, scraggly beard, warts on his face, his skin hanging in folds from his bony limbs, Rudraksha mala around his neck, I mean, really, your sort of absolute cliched image of the naked Hindu, so holy man, the timeless otherworldliness of the sage. But in this picture that went around the internet, this guy is chatting away on a mobile phone. And that is ultimately the reconciling of opposites that we have to live with in India. And there's a lot happening. If there is one area that we can talk about leadership, it's probably in the area of frugal innovation, something which India is turning out to be very good at. Our companies have, we all know about Jugaad, of course, but beyond Jugaad, the invention of sophisticated electrocardiogram machines that are 1/6 the price of foreign ones, or the Tata Nano, which meets all European emission standards. I know it's been a marketing disaster in India, but globally, it's seen as an absolute reflection of frugal innovation, whereby stripping out the inessentials, by re-engineering processes, India's been able to make a car that's 5 times cheaper than the nearest competitor of equivalent size and quality. Or, for that matter, of interest to the young students here, is the low-cost handheld computer that Kapil Sibal unveiled a couple of months ago, which is going to cost only 2,250 rupees. And as the rupee goes down, that's barely $45 now. This is Akash. It has a resistive 7-inch touchscreen like the Apple iPad. It comes in a rugged plastic casing, far tougher than the iPads. It has 2 gigabytes of flash memory. Unlike the iPad, better than the iPad, it has 2 USB ports. And of course, it has Wi-Fi capability. It uses the Android 2.2 operating system. And it consumes a meager 2 watts of power, which can be supplied by an internal battery that could be charged using a solar-powered charger. So you can use it even in places where you have power cuts. And as you know, for students, and the students in this hall will know, the government is willing to subsidize 50% of the cost. So you'll basically have, for 20 American dollars, you'll have your own tablet in your hands. That, I think, is where India can lead in the world, and it's going to transform. If we can manufacture this, sustain the quality, and get it used, we can transform the way in which people even think about handheld computing. The important thing here is that we are becoming a player in globalization, not just a subject in it. That our ability to improvise on a shoestring, to come up with creative solutions, is extremely important. But it's not just at the low end. The same Tata Motors that makes the Nano has also bought the Jaguar, which is the favored car of British ambassadors around the world. So I always love telling British ambassadors that I meet that they're driving around in an Indian car now. You know, it sends a post-colonial frisson through me. But actually, I'll give you a better example of that phenomenon. Was when Jamshedji Tata, back 100 years ago, a little more than 100 years ago, was trying to set up India's first steel plant. In the teeth of British hostility and opposition, a British official of the day snootily remarked that he would be willing to eat every ounce of steel that an Indian was capable of producing. It's a pity he didn't live long enough to see the descendants of Jamshedji Tata acquire the remnants of British steel when they bought Chorus in Europe. Might have given him a very bad case of indigestion. But I don't want to get complacent. I was told you didn't want me to sound like a politician, so I'm not sounding like a politician, but I do want to remind you there are still huge problems we have to overcome. And I'm not going to just talk about the poverty line and starvation and hunger and farmer suicide, though it is staggering that the country that has the world record what I wanted to say very simply is that I will go into it in the Q&A if it interests you, but what worries me is that we mustn't act as if we are an emerging market, but a submerging polity. We have to tackle these challenges and we have to overcome them. And we have to use our democracy effectively to do that. And to me, to use more modern metaphors, we need to tackle both the hardware and the software of development. The hardware are the ports, the airports, the roads, the railways, the basically creaking infrastructure in our country today, which has been neglected for too long by successive governments. No one can be excused or be exempt from blame. We need to get that right. But equally, and perhaps even more important, we have to get right the software of development, by which I mean education, training, sanitation, healthcare. I mean, you know, we talk about a demographic dividend. 65% of our population is under 35. I think Sachin yesterday gave you similar numbers. And that means that for the next 30 years, India should have a youthful, dynamic, and productive working population at a time when the rest of the world, including China, is aging. And we could be the engine of the world. But we can only do that if our young people growing up into this, first of all, have an economy which will offer them jobs they can do and they can fit into it. And second, if they have an education or training to be able to fulfill what's available in that economy. You know that we have 72% of kids in government schools dropping out by the 8th grade. Are they going to be able to cope with the demands of a 21st century economy? We have so many kids who've never seen the inside of a school. How are they going to cope? And then what can we do about a country where there are so many people and yet there's a shortage of masons and plumbers and carpenters because our vocational training is so pathetic and so lacking? These are all things we need to address as well before we can speak in meaningful terms of world leadership. We're doing some things right. In fact, I mentioned that the poor are getting less poor. McKinsey says that our middle class will be 525 million people by 2025. That's a huge, huge, huge change. That will, of course, be larger than the entire population of America or of Europe, and probably larger than the middle class of any country in the world except China. And they're going to need development. We're looking for $1 trillion to be invested in infrastructure in the coming 5-year plan. And we're going to have to engage the private sector. So all of you young management graduates going into the private sector, you have to see the India growth story is also part of your story. It's no longer just your company's bottom line you have to think of. You have to think about how you can partner with the public sector and the public services of the government in producing meaningful and effective results for the transformation of our country. And the politicians have to get it right too. There are a lot of reforms still required. We can talk about that. The next generation reforms in areas of knowledge and innovation, financial sector reforms, educational reforms, reforms against corruption, a lot of things happening there. And I'll be very happy to talk about that if you want me to, but I told the organizers I'm going to try and leave enough time for questions, and I've taken longer than I intended to. I just really want to stress that there are very many positive changes happening in our country, that the cliched image of India as this unchanging land of timelessness has got to be abandoned. We are not at all that anymore. We are very much a land where there have been dramatic transformations. In economics, I've talked about already. In politics, you know it. Can you imagine a Dalit woman ruling in UP for the 3rd successive time? And this is in the heartland of Aryavrat, where for a Dalit, let alone a Dalit woman, to exercise any authority would have been inconceivable for 3,000 years. Where did that come from? That came from our democracy, from the use of the ballot box to give power to those with the vote. That's the kind of transformation that's happening in our country. And it's sustained by this extraordinary Indian idea. You know, when I speak to Americans, I tell them, oh, you call yourself a melting pot. You know, we're not a melting pot. Because you can easily tell a Bengali from a Punjabi and so on. We are still a collection. But I said, what we are really is we're a thali. We're a collection of different bowls on one plate. Each bowl has a different dish. Each dish tastes different, so it doesn't necessarily flow into the next bowl. But they belong together on the same plate, and they combine on your palate to give you a satisfying repast. That is the Indian idea. And that Indian idea needs democracy to sustain it. Because democracy says it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, you see. You can endure differences of caste, creed, color, culture, cuisine, costume, custom, conviction, and still rally around a consensus. And that consensus is on the basic democratic principle that in a big, diverse democracy like ours, you don't really need to agree all the time, so long as you will agree on the ground rules of how you will disagree. The great strength of India, in my mind, is that we have maintained consensus on how to manage without consensus. So, we will move forward. I have a lot of faith in our civil society. I have a lot of faith in our ability to face these challenges and to come to positive outcomes. I know we can do the right thing, but we must also do the thing right, and that's something that we have to get right when we're dealing with the Lokpal bill in Parliament this coming week. But coming back to this challenge of leadership in globally turbulent times, I would stress that to celebrate something about India today, it isn't world leadership. It isn't even economic growth, which, as I said, is slipping now. It's not even the question of what we're trying to do domestically to transform our country, the hardware, the software, all of that. What it is to me that's worth stressing today is that all this is taking place. This great adventure of connecting 600 million Indian villagers to the global village. This adventure is taking place in a democracy, in an open society, in a rich and diverse and plural civilization, in one that's open to the contention of ideas and interests within it, that's unafraid of the prowess or the products of the outside world, that's wedded to the democratic pluralism that's India's greatest strength, and that is determined to fulfill and liberate the creative energies of its people. That is the transformed India of the early 21st century, and its place in today's turbulent world is well worth celebrating. Thank you for listening to me, and Jai Hind. Shall I stand here for the Q&A? For the questions? Is there a mic there? Yeah, mic. Thank you.
Good morning, friends. A very unique, first of its kind record has been set by Dr. Tharoor in his very first visit to Indore and his very maiden speech and address at this conclave. This is, as you all know, our 20th management conclave, and we have had good fortune of having several great minds addressing us in these conclaves. But it's for the first time that leave aside the opening the session for the floor participation. Not even before the speaker has finished his address, have I received more than 24 questions on the dais, much before his speech was over. Certainly a reflection of the interest and excitement that his personality, interaction, and address has generated in this house. In fact, the questions had started coming late night yesterday itself, when some of us had the good fortunes and opportunity of interacting with him over dinner. He was very tired, coming all the way from Thiruvananthapuram to Bombay to Indore with a layover of 3 hours. And we had requested him that there will be a select audience of about 150 people who would like to interact with him over dinner. There were 300 people, but hardly had he bargained that he would have to shake hands with all 300 people and also stand for personal photograph with each one of them. That was just wonderful. Thank you so very much, Dr. Tharoor, for that. There's also a minor statistics record, which certainly does not surprise me, and I'm sure it won't surprise most of you here either. The majority of the questions that have been received, in fact, overwhelming majority of the questions that have been received and posed to Dr. Tharoor have come from the opposite sex. The first question, with your permission, that has come in from Shweta Kedia. She would like to know, Dr. Tharoor, that what you enjoy being most, an author who writes books which go on becoming the bestsellers, or debating in the parliament on the policy issues, or giving your regular dose of very famous tweets on the Twitter.
Well, Shweta, wherever you're sitting, I think the secret to life is to enjoy everything you're doing. Whether you're addressing groups in Indore, or speaking in Parliament, or writing books, or having breakfast, or sending out tweets. The truth is, obviously, life offers you a lot of things that you don't particularly enjoy. And I have to admit that I've had my fair share of them, perhaps my unfair share of them. But you try and do everything with your full attention and with, by engaging yourself, your mind, your spirit, your soul, you'll get something truly satisfying out of it. There's no point, in my view, doing one thing and wishing you were somewhere else, or doing one thing and wishing you were doing something else. While you're doing it, do justice to it. If you're not enjoying it, move on as rapidly as you can. Otherwise, enjoy what you're doing. It's the best recipe for life.
Thank you, sir. This question has come in from a young management student, Ruchi Shukla of Aurobindo Institute. She had her marketing MBA paper yesterday, and she has won this afternoon at 3 o'clock. Sir, she would like to understand that what is your message to young management students, over 3,000 sitting here, post their education? Would you like them to serve the corporate world, or would you like them to join Indian politics?
Well, given my own experience in Indian politics, any advice I give you on that subject may have to be taken with a generous dose of salt. So let me not speak in those terms. I believe that every one of us, whatever our professions, has a twin obligation. The first is to do very well at what we're doing. So you're going to be a marketing person or a manager or a private sector business person. Do it well, be the best you can be at it. That's what you owe to yourself and to the world. For all the studies you've done, the preparations you've done, be the best you can be. But at the same time, in whatever profession you are, and it applies to doctors and lawyers as well as business managers, remember that you are not just living by yourself, or indeed in an immediate family. You are part of a larger unit, a community, a society, a nation. And that the community, the society, and the nation have the right to expect something of you. Why has God put us on this planet? It can't just be to make a bit of money at the end of the day and leave the planet with a bigger back balance than the day we were born. That would be a rather pointless exercise. Surely we've been put here to make some difference to others by having been here. That if we can leave the world by having changed a number of lives for the better through things we have done, then only could we have made a mark. And the same applies to those whose lives we have changed. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone will do it through changing the lives of millions by entering politics, for example. If you have a taste for that and you're willing to make the effort and the sacrifices, if public service appeals to you, yes, please go ahead. I would welcome the infusion of bright, young, educated minds in our politics. But if that's not for you, there is no shame. You can actually serve the nation by doing well in whatever else you're doing. I talked about the importance of public-private partnerships in our infrastructure development just a few minutes ago. That shows that even being in the private sector, you can contribute to the growth and welfare of our country. Studies around the world have demonstrated, for example, that the biggest beneficiary of good roads is the poor. So if that's the case, if you are working for an engineering firm that builds a good road, you are actually helping the poor. There are ways in which you can contribute, even without directly going into public service yourself, because as long as what you're doing is for the good of others, if you're able to make some difference to others' lives, you will have made that contribution. I do want to stress, however, that politics is a field in which we do need lots of injections of fresh blood, of fresh ways of thinking about how to solve problems, and indeed a different kind of mindset would always help. There has already been a change in the nature and complexion of our politicians over the years, and a lot of the younger generation are bright young people who will relate to most of the people in this hall. I'm sure you saw this with Sachin Pilot yesterday. But the truth is that politics is still by and large a full-time profession. Everyone who's in politics, with very few exceptions, has done nothing else. They've gone from their student days as politicians all the way to their final positions. And I think that's fine, because you do need people who've dedicated themselves like that, but it's not enough. One does need, in my view, injections of people who have tested their minds, their reflexes, their judgment, and their experience in different fields, and who can bring that to bear into their understanding of politics. So if you come from the world of management, of business, of engineering, of medicine, whatever else, it seems to me you bring a valuable additional perspective that can complement what the existing full-time professional politicians know and understand. And I think that fusion will do the country a lot of good. So I'm not discouraging you at all, but right now do very well what you're setting out to do, and keep an eye open for where you can make a more direct contribution to our public life.
Doc, the next question is from Monica Vadhvani of Prestige Institute. She just finished her MBA. What's the one word which defines India of today? As a young entrepreneur, what one thing should I keep in mind?
Well, diversity would be my answer. I think our marketing gurus have come up with Incredible India. Incredible India is a great tourist slogan. I like it, and it shows how much there is about India to astonish people. Though as somebody working in the real world of India, I also want the Incredible India to be balanced by a credible India that actually gets things done and does them right. But if you were to speak about the one thing about India, it's always difficult to pick just one. I would pick diversity. We are a land of the most astonishing diversity. As I wrote in my book, India from Midnight to the Millennium, we have no country in the world has a greater variety of topographical and climatic differences, geographical and ethnic differences, linguistic differences, religious differences. We have a country with, God knows, 922 political parties listed by the Election Commission. We've got all the four major religions, 6 different systems of classical dance, and 300 ways of cooking the aloo. I mean, we are a land of absolutely rich diversity. And that diversity means a consciousness that there can never be a one-size-fits-all solution to India. That in India, there is no one way. There are multiple ways of doing things, of seeing things, of understanding things. And that through that experience, India offers you the ability, it seems to me, to adjust, to constantly think flexibly. Whether it's, if you're marketing a product in one part of India, you may market it differently in another part of India. Whether you're meeting a person of a particular region or language or culture or religion, you may have to behave in a different way from what you would do somewhere else with a friend. These constant adjustments actually make Indians much more flexible, much more adaptable, and particularly well suited for international assignments. Because we are doing in India what foreigners don't have to do in their countries and find it difficult to adjust to when they go abroad to other countries. Indians tend to be very good at international service, whether in the private sector or in the intergovernmental sector, because we are used to growing up with diversity and we adjust very well to it.
Sir, after taking 3 straight questions from the women manager, I'm tempted, mere for the balancing's sake, to take next question from a male counterpart. And incidentally, this question comes from a former diplomat himself, ex-IG of police, and a very good friend and a senior colleague of us at Indore Management Association, Mr. Vinay Agnihotri. Sir, he states that you have been a very successful and distinguished diplomat at highest level yourself. You would have exchanged views with your counterparts of various other countries. What's the perceptual difference do you find of the then India and the now India amongst the world leaders?
Huge difference, Mr. Agnihotri. I think that when I first went abroad, which is a little before, I think, your first assignment abroad, I found that we were either a vast area of ignorance, that people did not simply know anything about India, or that what they had was just a received wisdom of, frankly, a poverty-stricken nation, mendicants with begging bowls, naked fakirs lying on beds of nails, a chap with a loincloth climbing up a rope, or at best, a Maharaja on a caparisoned elephant. I mean, there was nothing in between. There was no consciousness of Indians like the ones in this room. That was simply not there. And there's been a dramatic sea change in the perception. For 2 reasons mainly, I think, looking at least the Western perception of India. The first has been the prevalence and success of Indian immigrants in these countries. In places like America, for example, where you find that Indians are thriving everywhere. There was a television show called ER that was set in a hospital waiting room, emergency room. And in the first times it came out, there were a lot of negative reviews saying, this is totally unrealistic. How can you have a hospital emergency room without an Indian doctor? And they actually had to write a part for an Indian doctor and cast it because people were so used to seeing Indian doctors. Or that the prominence of Indians in various aspects of American life has suddenly made people aware of India much more. And this is an important factor in people's perception. But the other has been our outstanding success in IT and everything from starting companies in Silicon Valley to our own work in India in doing offsourcing, business process outsourcing in this country, using our skills in IT, in software development, when Y2K was supposed to happen, that all the computers in the world were going to crash when 2000 came along, and Indian software programmers everywhere went and wrote all the code. Suddenly people woke up and suddenly thought of Indians as these smart, highly educated, mathematically gifted people. But now the opposite danger is happening. Every Indian in the Western world is assumed to be either a software guru or a computer geek. In fact, a friend of mine who, like me, did his honors degree in history, was accosted at Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam by an anxiously perspiring European who said, you're Indian, can you help me fix my laptop? so there is a danger too that this other image may be going. I mean, it's striking though that now Indians are seen as synonymous with mathematical excellence, IT skills, that IITs are spoken of in America now with the same reverence that MIT was. And so the branding of India in today's terms has changed very significantly and positively.
Thank you, sir. And before I go on with my next question, friends, may I have a huge round of applause for our next speaker who has just walked in, D. Shiv Kumar, Managing Director, Nokia, Asia Pacific. Warm welcome to you, sir. Sir, I'm merging two questions here. It's from Mr. B.N. Gupta of Flexitef International and Dr. S.L. Kale of IAPS Academy. What's your take on censorship of internet, especially social network in India? The extended part is, and if you allow me to be candid, sir, here, the question reads, does your resignation from the Union Council of Ministers indicate that in the Indian political system, plain speaking is a big demerit and sycophancy a big merit, even in 21st century?
Somebody clearly wants to get me into further trouble today.
Sir.
Well, look, on the first part of the question, censorship is unacceptable. We are a democracy. Freedom of expression is fundamental. I already believe we have too many restrictions. Unlike most other democracies, in India, in the Constitution, freedom of expression is not an absolute right. It is circumscribed under various categories, which fortunately have not been implemented by governments except during the emergency. But technically, our freedom of expression in India, under the Constitution, can be limited by the government of the day for a whole list of reasons, including national security, relations with foreign states, communal harmony, various things. There is a whole list. And it's actually a much more restrictive list than we realize, because fortunately, no government, as I said, except for those 22 months of the emergency, no government has attempted to qualify our rights or to censor our press. And we are a very free country. In fact, I am proud of the fact that there is a wider range of expression available in our public print, particularly, not so much obviously in the audiovisual media, but in our public print press and in our political process. A wide range of freedom of expression is available. But I know the question lies before us because of what happened a week, 10 days ago when Kapil Sibal was accused of asking for censorship. And I was asked on Twitter about this, and I had said already that even though I myself have been the victim of a lot of unfair, frankly dishonest and false attacks, I still would not want to censor it because that's a much more bigger danger for our country. But when they said, well, what, in that case, what do you think of what Kapil Sibal is accused to have done? I said, I won't answer until I speak to him myself. And I did speak to him. And I spoke to him, and he said, this is completely not true. I have not asked for censorship. And in any case, it's not about political matters, which is what was being alleged, that he wanted to censor something derogatory about our party leaders and so on. He said it wasn't about that. And he mentioned and described to me, when we spoke, a couple of things that had been brought to his attention on the internet that, had they been seen by certain people, could have truly been dangerously communally inflammatory. And he said he had asked people like Facebook and so on to take these things down, because they, if seen, could have generated literally violence, violent reaction, a riot, whatever. To my mind, that had to be understood in our society. We are sadly a society in which people are prepared to get inflamed over these matters. And sadly, we have seen riots, we've seen lives being lost over particularly deliberate communal provocations. So it seems to me that just as in America, for example, no one would publicly use the N word for a black American because it would be considered deeply offensive. Similarly, in our society, there must be some things that people are not going to say about other communities, other religious groups and their prophets and their gods and so on. And if people are still irresponsible enough to say it, then there is an argument to be made that those who are responsible for providing that service should remove the post. And there I must say I did not disagree. I was attacked almost as much as Kapil Sibal was for saying this. But having heard the examples which are not fit to be repeated here, I did feel that he had a point and it was not an invalid point. But it cannot be pre-censorship as was wrongly reported in the media. With 100 million internet users in India alone, you can post anything you like. But if you post something that can truly be inflammatory, insulting and hurtful to people for things they can't help, like their religion or their appearance, I think we should definitely take it down. And that is not censorship in my view, that is common sense. Just as, I mean, if I can use a very blunt example, women in their bikinis can take off their tops in places like Copacabana or Bondi Beach or Saint-Tropez, but if you tried to do that in Goa, you would risk assault or arrest. There are cultural differences in the world, and we do have certain challenges in India, which any responsible government has to take account of. It is not censorship. It must not be ever done for political reasons, but we have to understand why some of this may be necessary. On your second point, I just want to say very simply, I don't want to get into issues relating to why and how and wherefore I decided to resign at the time that I did. But as you've seen, I am still very active politically, particularly in my constituency, but also in Parliament. And I don't believe that I have spoken any less frankly when I have chosen to speak.
Thank you, sir. Apparently, Dr. Tharoor's busy schedule and next flight, which is at 12:30, would be breaking several hearts. So I'll be only taking a couple of questions, maybe two. So there's one question. I'm not very clear on the question, but there are please written 10 times. Please, please, please make sure that you get this question. The gender is also not written. It is only written Sony. And it says, democracy of love is adultery. Do you agree with our statement? Yes, no.
Democracy?
Democracy of love is adultery. Do you agree with our statement? Yes or no?
It needs some thought. Democracy of love would mean presumably that everybody has an equal chance at getting love. Is that adultery? That would mean, I suppose, that just as you vote for one political party in a democracy, and the next election you vote for another political party, which is unfaithful and therefore, I suppose, like adultery. No, I think adultery should not be used in this context for a very simple reason. Adultery happens after you take on a solemn commitment of marriage. And as long as you are in a marriage, then you don't have the right to indulge in what you may call the democracy of love. And therefore, that would be adultery. But as long as you're not married, you are free to love, and by all means, enjoy your democracy.
Sir, the last question, or probably the second last, Mr. J.R.D. Tata used to say, I don't want India to become an economic superpower. I want India to become a happier country in the world. Sir, what's your take on that? The question comes from Vishnu Patidar, PIMR.
Right, Vishnu, it's a good question, and there is actually a serious amount of research and writing taking place in this idea, which was formally advanced and adopted by our neighbor Bhutan. Bhutan said gross domestic product is a useless measurement, that there's no point just measuring economic activity and saying a country is richer because of that. You should measure gross national happiness. And Bhutan says, and in fact, there's one very interesting thought, which environmentalists have talked about. If you go and chop down a forest of trees and chop it into timber and sell the timber, you're actually raising your GDP. Because by chopping down the thing, you're employing the choppers, the woodcutters, the truck drivers who are transporting it, you're spending money on petrol, then you're taking it to market, you're converting it into planks or furniture, you're then selling it, you're making money of that. All of that makes your GDP go really up, but you've destroyed a forest. You've destroyed all the possibility of better ozone, of animals and birds living in that forest, the pleasure children got from running through it. So is that correct measurement of what is the right thing to do? It's a very intelligent question. So the notion of gross national happiness says, no, we won't measure economic activity in dollar terms as the be-all and end-all of our GDP. We will measure how people are content. Do they find fulfillment in life? And out of that fulfillment, are they able to feel happy? The great problem with that, however, is that you're trying to objectively measure something which is a fundamentally subjective feeling. Happiness is subjective. Remember, people say money can't buy you happiness. That's the ultimate proof that you can't measure happiness. Somebody with $1 billion in the bank doesn't feel happy, then how can money buy him happiness or her happiness? So you know that you can't measure happiness. A very poor person may have found the secret of happiness without having monetary advantage. So one could argue there is a very, very good way of looking at it. Whether either is complete in itself can be disputed, but the Bhutanese solution works well for Bhutan. The GDP solution works well for the Western industrialized countries as a measurement. Perhaps reality in India will lie somewhere between the two. If we can both improve our economic activity and learn to find happiness with what we have, with what we are and what we are becoming, that will be the way forward.
Probably the last question, last and half, I just received in BBM also, sir.
Okay.
The last question is your quick take on FDI entry into the country and anti-corruption movement.
Quick on both of those. On FDI, I was designated by the party to be the lead speaker in the parliamentary debate that never happened. So I prepared about 3 hours worth of material on the subject. I'll try and give you the 3-minute version. Very simply, I believe that investing, whether from outside or from inside, but in this case the issue is from outside, would have been wonderful for the Indian consumer and wonderful for the Indian farmer. It would have been rough on the Indian middleman up to a point. To summarize, right now when you buy your sabzi in the bazaar, you are paying 5 times what the farmer gets. That is the average. You're paying 5 times for your aloo or your bengan or whatever, what the farmer has got for growing it. Everything in between has gone to the middleman, or in our case, many middlemen, from the mandi, the wholesaler, the mandi, the distributor, and so on. Now, if you had major professionalized corporate FDI coming in from companies that are used to doing this around the world, have got their systems streamlined, know how to create their supply chains, their distribution, their cold storage, and so on, they will purchase directly from the farmer so they can afford to pay the farmer more than he's getting right now. But by eliminating the middleman, they can sell it to you at a price lower than you're paying right now. So the consumer benefits and the farmer benefits. The striking thing about this, of course, is that 40% of the fruits and vegetables grown in India are wasted every year. 40%. We throw away more food than the entire continent of Australia grows. So in those circumstances, getting in professionalized corporates so that you don't have to throw away a tomato here because it can be put in a cold truck and sold in Calcutta where it's not available, that would transform the lives of farmers. It would overall have a depressive effect on agricultural prices because more food and fruits would be available everywhere. So it's in many ways a no-brainer. But the fact is that the organized opposition of the retailers in between, the middlemen in between, have created a certain problem. And there is a legitimate concern of politicians that the kirane dukan, the mom and pop stores, as the Americans call them, will be pushed out of business if wholesalers come. Now that too is actually a misplaced concern, because these big Walmarts and Carrefours and Tesco's and so on, if they come, they will need a large amount of space. It's highly unlikely to be in the heart of a city, because they won't get that kind of land. They will have big facilities with parking and trolleys and so on, and you will have to make a trip there to buy major items that can last in your fridge for a week or two. Once you do that, for your daily replenishments, you will still go to your kirane ka dukan, obviously. And again, they can change their business model. They can stay open longer hours than a Walmart will. They can deliver even small items at home. You suddenly forgot a bar of soap or a toothpaste. They can send a little boy running over to give it to you because they live next door to you, which Walmart will not do. There are various ways in which our mom and pop stores can adjust their business models to actually thrive and flourish. And China, when they went for FDI in retail, the statistics are really revealing, because they are a country in some ways similar to ours. both the local retailers and the big stores have grown. Nobody has suffered, at least judging by the statistical numbers. So the argument in favor of FDI and retail is very strong. On the corruption issue, the fact is that Anna Hazare ji has definitely touched a chord amongst millions of people. I'm not surprised that a channel that is actually quite sympathetic to our government named him Indian of the Year yesterday. All of this is not surprising. But I do worry about some aspects of the movement. The first is people who have supported him know what they're against. They're against corruption, and they're right to be against corruption. But do they fully understand what they're for? Have they read the details of his Lokpal bill, which he insists must be adopted without any change in the parliament, to only have it his way? Now there it worries me a great deal because, you know, there are 2 or 3 fundamental issues that I have as somebody who has tried to understand the pros and cons of the issue. The first is we have been swayed by the media hysteria over the big ticket corruption. The Commonwealth Games scandal, the, 1,76,000 crores on the telecoms. Frankly, that's a kind of number it's even difficult for us to understand. I mean, how do you get to 1,76,000 crore? If we put 100 rupee notes in piles, will it fill up the stadium? I don't know. I mean, it's difficult, and it doesn't come out of your or my wallet. It comes out of the ether, out of cyberspace. But the real corruption that hurts most Indians is much more petty and basic. It's when you go to get a driving license and you have to bribe the examiner. It's when you lose a father or a mother and you have to go and get a death certificate before you can do any of the other administrative things, and the fellow won't process it unless you bribe him. Or a pregnant working class woman who goes to a government hospital where she's entitled to get a free bed, and she won't get it without bribing someone, an orderly at least, otherwise she has to deliver her child on the floor. Or the widow who won't get her insurance payment or her pension for her husband without bribing a clerk. I mean, these are the kinds of things that sadly are the real challenges of corruption for the majority of people in India. And those challenges are not going to be met by creating a large supra-institution in Delhi with an army of 20, 30,000 in all the ministries. Rather than, you're still not going to have a Lokpal in every driving license office, in every municipal office, in every hospital. It's not possible. So I'm not sure whether the cure is targeting the right disease. Secondly, whether the cure might not impede effective government action, because people in ministries might be intimidated and afraid of the Lokpal person parked in the ministry. And you may well find that they become paralyzed in terms of decision making, because bureaucrats by and large follow the principle that you can't be punished for what you haven't done. So the basic principle of most bureaucrats is do as little as possible so that you won't be punished for it. Now that bureaucrats are being punished for merely putting their signatures on files that the ministers wanted them to, now they're going to become even more cautious with it. So that's a second risk, that the cure will be worse than the disease. And the third and biggest problem for me, as somebody who has studied the history of institutions around the world, who has looked at these things, is that this is fundamentally in the Anna Hazare Jan Lokpal Bill version. It is an unaccountable institution that has the power to investigate, prosecute, and punish all in one institution, and covers everybody from the Prime Minister all down. I don't think that version is going to come out finally out of Parliament. But in that version, it reminded me of nothing less than the Spanish Inquisition, which was set up by the Catholic Church in the 1400s, out of the best intentions in the world to promote faith in God and so on, and actually became an instrument of torture and suffering for many people, burning victims at the stake. We don't want the Spanish Inquisition coming out of the best motives that people may have. So we need to tackle corruption, but we need to do a number of things. A Lokpal bill is one thing, and it's got to be better than the one that Anna Hazareji's people are coming forward with, because it must have some checks and balances. And we must support it with more things. The Right to Information Act is important. We must have a whistleblower protection thing so somebody can blow the whistle on corruption without being punished. We must have more transparency in laws so people can understand the laws and others can't exploit the loopholes. We must reduce the discretionary powers of bureaucrats and politicians to allocate things, because if you can allocate things out of turn, that can be monetized. So all of this, there's going to be a whole series of things done to ensure that corruption is reduced. But ultimately, the final thing that must be said was said by Mahatma Gandhi 70 years ago, when he said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." Gandhiji understood very fully, even on the issues of corruption, there is corruption because there is both a giver and a taker. We are only looking at the taker. The corrupt person must be punished. But let's all look at ourselves. How many of us can truthfully say we haven't paid a bribe to somebody, that we haven't tried to make a shortcut, Bribe takers exist because bribe givers want shortcuts, they want favors, they want to get something they're not entitled to, avoid punishments that they are deserving of, and so on. And by doing that, they have encouraged and permitted the flourishing of corruption. That is, we have allowed it. The old line that when you point one finger, three are pointing back at you. So I just say to everyone, please remember, if we ourselves don't give, then there'll be nothing for the corrupt to take. That ultimately may be the best solution for our country.
Thank you so much, Dr. I would quickly like to wrap up the session by making a small announcement. Indore Management Association, as you all know, the winner of 10 consecutive Best Management Association Award. Certainly, of course, is not a Rockefeller Association or certainly doesn't have the resources of Bill Gates and Melinda Association, but these constraints have not come in our way of dreams. To give the final winds and the shape of these dreams, Indore Management Association had requested Dr. Shashi Tharoor to continue to guide us, which he has so gracefully consented to do, and has accepted our invitation to be on the distinguished IMA Board of Mentors. I'm, sir, so very thankful to you. And may I request our young and dashing President, Mr. Shamit Dave, accompanied by young Chairman of Convention, Santosh Muchal, to come over the stage to present the plaque to Dr. Tharoor, please. Thank you so very much, Dr. Tharoor. Thank you so much, sir. You can select.